All right, so we are right now between series. We just finished up our annual summer question and answer series called What's Up With That, and we won't start our next series until the new school year. So we have a few Sundays that are kind of wide open that we can do whatever we want. And Mark and I have been talking back and forth for, gosh, I don't know, 4 months at least.
2 years.
About doing a Sunday like this, where he and I together talked to you about the subject that most preoccupies him in his role in our church family as our music coordinator. So today we're going to devote the entire teaching time, and really the entire service is focused on worship, and even specifically how music fits into worship. So to do that, we're going to start by talking about the big or more fundamental subject of worship. That's a churchy word, right? It's not a word that you probably very often use if you're not a Christian or you're not in church circles. So we need to start by talking about what that very churchy word actually means in a way that a non-churchy person might understand it and might understand why it's so powerful. So here's the first question. Let's talk about what the Bible says about worship. And in talking about what the Bible says about worship, let's talk about how that challenges or widens a lot of the ways that we as American Christians in the year 2012 think about that concept of worship.
Yeah, well, first of all, the worship guy talking about music and worship, real original, but we'll give it a shot. And I would just quickly just say a prayer that Lord help me to, or help everyone else to separate the wheat from the chaff of what I have to say and take away something worthwhile. So, yeah, so what the Bible does say about worship, amongst other things, is that God alone is worthy and should be the recipient of true worship. You saw the Israelites all the time in the Old Testament worshiping a bunch of other things. They worshipped a golden piece of metal. It was a cow. They worshipped other gods. And I think you saw God, he was almost a jilted lover. Like someone cheated on him or led astray, or eyes were caught by something else, and he was jealous and wanted that worship all to come to him. And so I think one of the most important things about it is I think it's a form of communication with God. I don't want to say a dialogue. I might stop there, but it is a form of communication with him, praising him, giving him glory, recognizing his goodness, his provision in our lives. And certainly upholding us through times of trouble and trial. So I guess starting with that and moving into maybe some modern misconceptions about worship, I certainly feel, and having my experience in other churches has been, there's kind of this McWorship culture, I'll be honest, where the bigger, the better, the flashier, the showier it is, the conception is the better it is, and the more spiritual it is. And I don't buy that for a single second. I hope that you wouldn't either. It's kind of, I guess, the show. You could say the show. Something we do here, and something that is important to me, is that I try to keep it simple, not overdo it. We don't have any strobe lights up here. I asked PC about that, but he said no. But
Everyone look right there. There actually is a strobe light up there on the ceiling. We just choose not to use it.
Is that a disco ball?
It is.
Looks like Sputnik.
So next week, we'll work out how to use that.
We'll work that out.
I'm listening to you well.
Ooh,
Yeah, train of thought. Get your train of thought back.
Yeah, no. But if it is more about maybe the presentation and the style, and maybe not so much the substance, to me it becomes a distraction. The lights, song and dance, all that stuff. I speak figuratively on that, not literally. But if we're not focused on God when we're singing, especially in a church service, I just think that is off the mark of what true worship should be. So I think there's also a misconception that worship has to be music. Certainly that's enforced in the church scene, and that's great. Music as worship is great. Certainly I believe that, or else I wouldn't be doing what I do. But it doesn't just have to be music. There are other ways to worship, and going back to that first definition of communication with God, praising Him, giving Him glory, there are certainly other ways to do that than with singing. So with that, I will throw it to PC. Good transition, right?
Yeah, perfect. Mark's right. Worship gets, you can hear in what he said, worship gets misdefined. It's not very well understood now that we've got 2,000 years between us and the scriptures themselves. Listen to this verse from your New Testament and see if you can figure out what worship is in the biblical sense, and it will add to what Mark has already said. This is Romans chapter 12, verse 1. It reads, "Because of God's mercies to us, I urge you, my Christian brothers and sisters," this is Paul speaking, "to present your very bodies as living and holy sacrifices, one that is pleasing to God, which is the only right way to worship." Worship is about communication. Worship is about your life, most fundamentally. It is about who you think is worth your life. The word worship actually means worthship. Who do you think is worth the most in your life? And that very famous verse by St. Paul will tell you that as Christian people, we have decided that the person who is worth our life is not us. It's God, and it's His Son, Jesus. And so worship now becomes a value that you have, a priority that you have. It's something that you carry with you 24/7. And Mark's right. It is not this. Now, this can play a part in it, and we will come to that in a minute. But if you think, like many American Christians do, that you came to a quote-unquote worship service today, I think biblically speaking, you're sorely mistaken. You don't come to worship and then leave worship. Worship is a way that you choose to live. Jesus, by the way, addressed this very common problem in his day about what happens when you misdefine worship. He says, this is Matthew 15, verse 8. He says about the people listening to him, the Jews in his day, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." If you don't know this, let me just go ahead and say it. If you're not willing to give your life to Jesus, if you're not willing to sacrifice your life to God and to tell Him to do through you whatever He wants, just stop going to church. It's not worthwhile. Not only is it not worthwhile, it's a lie. You don't get brownie points for showing up, despite the fact that in Jesus' words, your heart is far from Him. Worship is about your life. It's about who you decide in your life is most important. And it's how daily you go about trying to live out that priority. Now let's talk for a minute about if that's a true biblical definition of worship or worthship, then why is it important that we don't just do it individually? But biblically, we are commanded, both in both the Old and the New Testament, to do it together. Well, why exactly is that so significant and invaluable to us?
Well, first of all, we might have heard this before, but when one or two or more Christians are gathered together in God's name, God's presence is there among them. That is, I think that's huge. That's big. When we're together here today, God is here. God dwells right here with us, and he certainly lives in us on a day-to-day basis as we go throughout our lives. So when Pentecost happened and God sent the Spirit, it wasn't just God lives somewhere else, or he lives just in the temple, or just is there on Saturdays, for drop-in office hours. He's always there. And when we gather together as a group in his name, he is there with us, and that enriches everything we do, everything we sing, everything we talk about. There's a passage here in terms of why we do this, why it's important to do it communally and not just individually. There's a passage from a book by Rob Bell called Sex God. I don't know if you have read it or not. I certainly recommend it. And no, this passage does not have to do with sex. But what he's talking about here is he's talking about why it's important, or excuse me, rather, he's talking about moments where we're gathered in groups and we can feel a little something extra in the room, in the place. And he's talking about why that is. And he's talking about music too, and we'll get into this a little later. He says, music is powerful because it connects us. We generally don't think in these terms, but it's true. And he's talking about the experience of a concert here. He says the experience of a great concert with everybody singing together, waving their hands in the air, and feeling a feeling of oneness permeates the room. We don't know each other. We come from vastly different backgrounds. We disagree on hundreds or thousands of issues. But for a time, for an evening, we gather together around the artists and the songs, and we get along. The experience moves us so deeply because there is a sense of this is how it's meant to be, I think. And that's a bit of a vague concept, but he says we have so few places where we can experience what God intended on such a large scale. And I think this goes, at the risk of dovetailing a little bit, this goes back to the original purpose of why we were created, which was, I think God created us to be in a state of constant, pure connection with him. We know that he is jealous for us. He wants our love. And that was why we were created. And I think certainly a concert setting is something that you can feel that without maybe knowing what it is. It's something intuitive that you can just feel it deep in your bones. It's a connection.
This is one of the places in the Old Testament where you hear both the command to gather together and to do what we do on Sunday mornings, but you begin to hear why. This is Psalm 111, verse 1. The psalmist writes, "Praise the Lord, I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart in the company of the upright people." I want you to think for a minute, and Mark's done a good job of helping you start to do this. Think for a minute all the things that can or should happen at a gathering like this that you cannot accomplish on your own. And it's not worship, by the way, right? I hope we've debunked that for you. Worship is something that I choose to do and you choose to do with your life. How you choose to prioritize God in it. But that being said, imagine with me all the things that can and should happen in a gathering like this that you cannot accomplish on your own. Can you think of some things? A basic one that Mark already alluded to reminds you that you're part of an us. You're not just a me. And if Americans have any prevailing problem, it's not remembering that we're part of an us. We tend to have me disease pretty bad. Well, this gathering reminds you that that's not true. You are part of a bigger us. And us, frankly, that has a history that's bigger than you. It was before you. It was going to be after you. You are simply part of it. You are caught up in the stream of the living church of Jesus Christ. That's what you do here. You remember that. When you gather here, you remember that not only are you part of an us that is not necessarily just you, you're ministered to in a way, or things happen in you that could not happen if you were by yourself. And that's largely because of the other people that make up the us. One of my favorite phrases about what you call this gathering on Sunday morning after Sunday morning comes to me from a Christian author named Annie Dillard. And she said that she used to go to her church week in and week out so that she could borrow the faith of the other people gathered there. Some Sundays, it's exactly what you need to do. You need to come here because you're full of pain or you're full of doubt, and you need to borrow the faith of the assembled people around you, the congregation of the upright, in the words of Psalm 111:1. Famous verses in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 25 and 26 will say that the reason Christians gather like this is so that, here's the quote, they can be stirred up to love and good deeds. I would like someone who's creative with words to come up with a better description for what this is than worship service or worship gathering that resembles the words in Hebrews 10:25. This is your agitation service. This is the place where you are encouraged and poked and prodded. This is our corporate cattle prod in your side. To
Put that
grow.
on the leaflet. Corporate cattle prod.
That resembles what's supposed to go on here in a way that you cannot do for yourself. We are supposed to stir one another up to love and good deeds, the writer of Hebrews says. We attach ourselves to something far bigger than ourselves when we come to a place like this. And it is vitally important to do so. But it isn't necessarily worship. Keep that in mind. Now, last, before we move to music, let's get concrete for a minute. If everything that Mark and I have said so far about worship and how Scripture views that subject is more or less on the beam, then we want to spend a few minutes helping you figure out how you as a person, how you as a follower of Jesus can be a person of worship. How can you take this deeply and centrally biblical idea and align your life with it throughout your weeks, your months, and your years?
Well, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer here. I can tell you some things from my life personally that hopefully may or may not apply here. But for one, going back to what PC said about the idea of worship being worthship and who you're deciding to put at first as a priority in your life and your day-to-day routine, and choosing to put God first and acknowledging His worth in your life, I think it can look like a lot of different things. Certainly one for me would be to, hey, we're all busy. That's not a question. So taking time to connect with God, taking 5 or 10 minutes out of your day to connect with Him, and that can, different people not experience it, but different people, it looks like different things for different people. For instance, some people feel a real connection maybe if they go out running in the country on some back roads, go out for a walk in the woods. For some people, it's reading the Bible, or it's reading a book. For some people, definitely myself included, maybe it's taking some time to listen to some music, play some music, sing. And by the way, God doesn't care what you sound like if you sing. He really doesn't. Thank goodness. And in those times of connection and trying to quiet yourself, quiet your mind and your soul, because it's a noisy world out there. Literally, metaphorically, there's a lot of different things, I think, shouting at you and trying to drown out the voice of God. We'd all, I think, love to hear a big booming voice from the heavens saying, Mark, this is what I want you to do this tomorrow. I want you to go serve this person. I want you to whatever. That's probably not going to happen. I think God speaks. He speaks in a small whisper, and hey, it's tough. It's tough for me sometimes, but to try to quiet yourself and hear that whisper, and in those moments of quietness, maybe getting a sense of conviction in terms of, hey, there's someone I've been wanting you to love on this week, something that I'm trying to change in you. And again, going back to the worship as a state of being, as a part of your everyday life, that's something that day in, day out, week in, week out, you can use to give glory to God, and to certainly, I think, using your own personal spiritual gifts, whatever those are, that's something that it's practical and can be done on a day-to-day basis.
Let me read to you from the Old Testament and another one of those Psalms out of the hymn book and the prayer book of the Old Testament and the church, and see if you can catch a connection about this topic in these verses. This is Psalm 100, verses 1 to 3. The writer says, "Shout to the Lord joyfully with all your heart. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful singing. Know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who made us and not we ourselves. We are his people, and we are the sheep of his pastures." Did you catch the movement? So the first part of that citation is about things you do to worship. In that case, he talked about singing. He talked about serving. And we do that to show God that he has the top billing in our life, not we ourselves. But did you catch why? It's so that we remind ourselves that he made us. We didn't make ourselves. That he is God, not us. That we are the sheep of his pastures. We are not the shepherd of our own lives. He is. And the basic point there is one that the Bible will make over and over again about human beings. We are forgetful. Even the best of us. The most sincere, devout Christian in the room. I'm talking about me. No, I thought I'm the best Christian in the room. I mean that I fit the bill. Oops. Yeah, I can almost guarantee that's not true. All of us are forgetful. That is, we do things and have moments when we feel very connected to God, like Mark said, or we sense that we are making decisions from our Christian values or priorities, or we are following the Spirit's lead to reach out to somebody or to do something that is out of our comfort zone, all those things that Mark said. But the truth is, we're forgetful. And what you have to do, and Mark's right, it's going to differ from person to person. What you have to do is have reminders in your day and in your week. That's part, by the way, of what we're doing here. If you want to define correctly from a biblical standpoint, what are we doing when we come Sunday after Sunday here? What do other churches supposed to be doing when they gather Sunday after Sunday, year after year? They are supposed to be remembering together. They're supposed to be coming together, and maybe for some people they realize, oh man, yeah, my week kind of went off kilter, and this reminds me, it realigns me like an out-of-joint back or spine. You need things in your day and your week that do that. What are those things for you? In this week's Deeper Roots email, we'll go into a little more detail about what some of those detailed or specific things could be, but hopefully if you've been walking with God long enough, you know some of the things that connect you with him or remind you of him best. And what you have to understand is that you've got to be deliberate and intentional about those things. If you're not, you're going to forget. And you may wake up 24 hours later, you may wake up 2 years later and realize, man, my life has drifted. I have made decisions I didn't want to make. The last time I felt like God and I were unified and walking in the same direction was far too long ago. You have to have things in your life that cause you to consciously remember him. Elsewise, you're just going to forget, no matter who you are. Now let's move to music specifically, because I hope now, by this part or moment in the morning presentation, you figured out music and worship are not the same thing. And too often we think of them that way. But that's not to say that from a biblical standpoint and from a human standpoint, music is not really, really significant. And we want to help you maybe understand that a little better this morning.
Yeah, you might have to cut me off on this one, PC. I might blab. Music is by its very nature, it's elemental. It goes back a long time. People have been making instruments, playing them, singing songs for so far back, for various different reasons. But I think something about music, it has a couple properties, perhaps, that just by its very intrinsic, just the way it is, nature, make it such. There's just a real connection, I think, between worship and music, and the two can really aid each other and not be one and the same. But one of the things about music is that you've probably heard this before. It's the universal language. It's the universal language. First of all, I believe it is, and it is for a reason. It's something that we can all. It's something we can all understand. It's something that is intuitive. It's emotion. It's not logic. It's not logic or reason based. It's pure emotion. It's very intuitive. That's why children, the elderly, people who can't play music, people who can't sing very well, it doesn't matter. We can all understand it, and we can all. I think if we're really honest with ourselves, we could probably all think of one time where we've heard a song, a piece of classical music, whatever, and it elicits some kind of emotional response in us. Me personally, all the time. Up here when we're singing music and we're worshiping, even if I'm part of the band and I'm singing, I will get chills all the time. And that's not because the band is awesome or it's like, I'm great. And, didn't miss a note on that song. Chill. No. That would be so bad, right? I get chills because the music, it's very powerful. And that's certainly a way that God reaches to me in that way and communicates something with me. Something else about music that makes it so very interesting and I think powerful is that it's a vessel. I kind of already talked about this, but it's a vessel through which emotion is transported. I remember I played in high school. I played in a wind ensemble band. I played the saxophone. And there's a day where we come in and everyone in the room is just really, there's a pall over the room. And I come in, well, what's going on here? And I found out that one of the members of the band had been in a serious car accident and was in critical condition in the hospital fighting for her life. And so right before we started the rehearsal, the director gets up there and he says, okay, we're gonna start playing now, but I just want you to know that, he said, I know a lot of people are struggling with this person being in the hospital, and there were people that were really shook up. And he said, as we start playing, just know that music can bring out emotions that you didn't even know you had, that are bubbling right under the surface in your subconscious. And so he said, if you start playing and for whatever reason you need to excuse yourself, he said, feel free to go do that. And lo and behold, we start playing a piece that it was a beautiful piece, and at least 10 people stopped playing and just walked out of the room within about probably 30 seconds of starting the piece. Music it brings out emotion. It can really just hit you like a thunderbolt, something you didn't even know was there. And something else, too, that, and I already touched on this, but music and worship, they work well together because, like I said, music is something that does connect us. I think it's one of the great uniters in the planet. There are so many things that divide us, so many things we squabble and disagree about all the time. Some of which being music, actually, but that kind of defeats the point I was going for. But here's what I mean by that. We can disagree on rap music. I don't like it. I love it. Whatever. We can disagree on that. But again, if you've ever been to a really good concert, then you can sense that unity there. Again, Rob Bell talked about in that passage that I read earlier. He says, 60,000 people at a concert. We come from all walks of life, races, ethnicities, whatever. We disagree on so many things. But when we're at that concert, we're not thinking of any of that. We are united. We are having a great time at the concert, just singing, going nuts, whatever. Actually, I think I read something in a science journal about when we sing, when we listen to music, part of the brain that releases stress-inducing hormones or chemicals, that shuts down when we play music, when we listen to it, or when we sing. So I really could go on and on about it, and it's part of why I love what I do, and it's part of the reason why I do what I do. Is music is just, for me, it is one of God's best gifts to humanity. I really believe that.
Let me add to that great insight from Mark. Do you know that music cannot be explained by evolution? Now, if you're a Christian and you do or do not believe in evolution, that's fine. But music cannot be explained by it. That is, we can't understand how we would have gotten it if it just came through normal evolutionary process. In fact, one of the leading atheistic exponents of evolution in our day is a guy named Steven Pinker from Harvard. He wrote in The Economist in 2008 these words about music. He said that music is like auditory cheesecake. And he said, as an evolutionist who does not believe in God, that if music vanished from our species, little would change. I beg to differ on the grounds of what Mark said and on my own experience with music. I think that tremendously undersells what music is and how it is almost hardwired into the human soul. Someone who wrote a rebuttal to that article in The Economist by Steven Pinker said, actually, quote, "Music satiates an appetite that nature cannot." This is how deeply music is woven into us. Some of you may know, who are more biblically literate, when the Bible gives you a vision of what's going on in heaven, what is always happening? Singing. Always singing. That in heaven, where God is, there is always music and melody and harmony. One of the great pictures, one of the great analogies, one of the great fictional accounts of creation that I've ever read is by J.R.R. Tolkien. And the way he describes creation is that God wrote a piece of music, and it was beautiful. And all of creation sang their part in the music. And you know what sin is? Sin is human beings deciding they don't want to sing their part. They want to sing what they do. And all of a sudden, the melody and the harmony is broken, and all you have is dissonance. I think that is an extraordinary picture of the world in which you and I live, and what you and I experience as human beings. I think if you take everything that Mark and I have said into account, you need to realize that music, I would not hesitate to say, that music is hardwired into the human species. And for reasons that I would say as a Christian, you can only begin to understand because of your belief in God. Your life is supposed to be like a piece of music that blends together with different parts. Our race is supposed to function like a piece of music, all playing different instruments, all playing our part. And the problem with the world is that we are not taught by music to live like music. Instead, we're all doing our own thing, and all it is noise. Now, if Mark and I are half right about the high value, maybe far more high than you thought, about music spiritually, let's finish today by talking about a few ways that you can weave music into your day in, day out experience and spiritual life as a Christian.
Well, I think technology has done us a favor in addressing this point. iPods are everywhere. Cars have CD players, iPod docks now. You can take music anywhere. You could even take it into space, and they've done that. I guess it's maybe a little tough for me to maybe talk to someone who isn't so music crazy like me. And yes, that is the word. I come home, I'm the kid that when I was younger, I would just go up to my room, put on some music, and just sing. I wouldn't do anything else. I wasn't multitasking. I wasn't cleaning up. I was just sitting there singing. And my mom comes up and, Mark, have you gotten a whole list of chores done? Nope. I was just singing. Sorry. And then I get grounded, but I wouldn't really care. My personal issues aside, there have been so many times where I come home from a long day or, whatever, maybe just feeling a little spiritually dry, just kind of beat up, and I put on some music. It's the first thing I do, because it de-stresses me, and I don't know if it centers, but it focuses me back on God, and it is literally like water to my soul. I can feel it. I feel spiritually dry, and it is literally like water to my soul. It's something tangible that I can feel. I don't know if that's your experience of it, but certainly music is something that you can put on in the background if you're doing a number of different things. And again, like I said, in terms of taking some time out of your day to connect with God or whatever that looks like, going for a run, you can bring music on a run. Some people, it's a journaling. They like to journal. You can put some music on when you're doing that. Some people, it's a distraction. I understand that. For a lot of people, I don't think it is. You see it all the time where people are doing yoga or whatever, and they put on some music. They put on some meditation music. They just want to sit there and just be alone with their thoughts. So I guess I would just encourage everyone to remember, like PC said, we're forgetful. I would say remember music's incredible power. Remember its edifying, spiritually enriching properties. It really has never, it's really never failed to give me a boost, to maybe comfort me in times when I need to be comforted, and like I said, moments of spiritual dryness. It's always something that just picks me up off the mat. And I think practically, it's not too hard to integrate into your everyday life.
I'll give you two specific biblical rationales for why music should play a key part of your spiritual routine. And it will build on what Mark said. The first one is this. As Mark said very well, music helps you tap into your emotions and your state of mind in a way that very little else can. If you'll allow me. Let's say it this way. It taps you into your true self. And most of us live lives where we don't want to be tapped in to what's really going on. The psychological and, yes, spiritual term for that is repression. Most of us try to skim across the surface of our lives and our experience. We would much rather be satiated with simple things. We would frankly much rather live on a superficial level and not deal with the highs and the lows that really affect us, our true selves. This is why some people eat too much. This is why some people drink too much. This is why some people work too hard. This is why some people think that money can make them happy or the new car will. It is all repression. And music, maybe more than words or a book ever could, makes you tap into or acknowledge your true self. Let me give you a couple of biblical examples. James in your New Testament, when he's wrapping up his letter, writes that if anyone among us is suffering, they need to pray. And if anyone is cheerful, they need to sing songs of praise. You tap into the truth of how happy sometimes you really are. Now here's the flip side. Job in the Old Testament in chapter 30, verse 31 says, in the midst of his great hurt and his great suffering, quote, I have tuned my guitar to mourning, and my pipes have been tuned to the voice of those who weep. There are some times that maybe music, better than anything you could say, any prayer you could utter, or anything anybody else could say to you, will help you tap into and acknowledge how much you hurt, or how frustrated or disappointed you are on any given day, in any given week. We are told in the Old Testament, in the history book of 1 Samuel, that King Saul often, this is chapter 16, verse 31, we are told that King Saul was often so agitated or distressed in mind that the only thing that could calm him down was David, yes, the person who would become King David someday, would play his harp. And it was the only thing that could quiet his mind. You need to spend your life tapping into who you really are and what's really going on, and not live like the rest of your culture that is trying with every breath, to every ounce of their strength, to not do that. And one of the ways you can do that best is through music. Here's the other biblical example I'll give you. Do you know that you don't just listen to music? Do you know that music teaches you? If you look at the New Testament letters, several times the Apostle Paul will remind the churches to which he's writing that they need to instruct one another, not by preaching, not by teaching, not by reading a book, not by going to a class. He will say, for instance, in Colossians 3:16, teach one another through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Teach one another through music. You become what you listen to. It forms you. Do you know why we sing when we come here? There are several reasons, many of which Mark and I have touched on. Let me tell you one you may not be aware of, because you're going to become what you sing. You will remember what we sing. It will teach you and remind you, and you will become it. Who do you want to be? What do you want to be like? What's important in your life right now? I suggest to you that you take Paul's point from the New Testament seriously enough that you find a music to match. Let me give you a couple of examples for me. You can tell that in the kind of church that we are and how outward focused we are trying to be, that sometimes it feels like we're doing things in a way that other people aren't. Do you know one of the kinds of music that I most often throughout the week listen to? I listen to punk rock. You know why? Because it's music about revolution. It's music that reminds me that Jesus people are supposed to be afoot in the world, and that fundamentally to be with Jesus means I'm not with my culture. I am following after him. I have found a music that speaks to me about what we are trying to do together. You know another kind of music I listen to? I listen to this especially on days where it's exceedingly stressful and I've got 10 things to do and I only have enough time to do about 5. I have to multitask in a way that is impossible. I listen to jazz. You know why I listen to jazz? Because jazz is some of the most complex music you will ever hear. And those guys seem to be playing 5 or 6 different instruments in 5 or 6 completely different ways, and somehow it makes perfect sense. It orders my day. It helps me multitask, believe it or not, exceedingly well. It teaches me, and music can do that for you. Before we end, would you guys thank Mark for doing this for us and giving himself to us in this way? You guys can get ready to sing again. I'll finish with this. I hope that what Mark and I have done for you today is maybe help you rethink what we do here when we gather, not just the role of music, but what worship is in general. And I want to give you or finish with another biblical description for this. There is a word that comes to us from the New Testament, and it is something that churches have picked up on for now millennia, because some of them still call their worship services by this name. It's a word that comes to us from Greek, and then it moved over into Latin, and the word is liturgy. Have you ever heard that word? About church services. And now usually when you think about liturgy, it has come to mean, oh, that's one of the places where they use incense and it smells kind of funny and the pastor's in a robe and we kneel when we pray and we sing really old hymns that predate me. Okay, do you know that is not what the word means? Literally, in the New Testament, liturgy means the work of the people. You know why you came here today? You know why Christians should gather in places like this, like we have for 2,000 years now? It's to go to work. We go to work to pray. We go to work to sing. We go to work to learn. We go to work to be stirred up to love and good deeds. You showed up here to put on your hard hat and go to work. That's what church is. It is liturgy. It is the work of the people. Would you pray with me?